in the comments. If you have any questions, put them in there. I'll try to answer them as fast as possible. So let's go over to coding. Gonna try to stop coughing on camera. No promises. Have to stop watching myself on my monitor because it's delayed because of YouTube. So let's get started. So when we left last time, we were trying to create a router in Vue, and I was running into some problems because my memory isn't as good as it could be. And so here, instead of use router, I think we need create router, which is going to make a lot more sense down here. And create router takes an object, if I remember right. And one of the objects is history, and I'm going to set up the history to be just a simple type of history. Now, there's a couple of things going on here before we get this actually working. Let's put that comma there so we can come back there. It's not finding route config, and it's not finding it because it's actually a type. So I'm going to say import type from Vue router, and it still doesn't like it. Well, let's go over here and let's see if we can find our documentation, because I have been known to mess all of this stuff up. So there's the create router. We need web, not hash history, but the other kind. But the problem I'm having here is the route, which I guess let's see if I actually need the types. Let's try just this and see if we get the, of course that's not going to work. We're going to call create web history here, which of course we're going to need from here. And when I'm writing this stuff, I understand the appeal of something like Vuex, not Vuex, of Next or Nuxt, where it's going to handle all these imports on your own. But I actually find, oh, it put it in there for me. I actually find that it's less obvious. So I'm going to get rid of this route since it looks like we're not going to need it. And the only thing we have left to figure out are these. To finish up that thought, I like the imports in the files instead of them being magically created, because I think it makes it more documented and easier to figure out what's going on. When it's automatically injecting all the types I think I want, it pretends that everything is in some global scope. And imports to me are much like in C# or Java, where you have namespaces that sort of hint at that as well. And so let's go over here where I'm exporting the home views. Now, because I'm wanting to export these, there's some special syntax here I could do to tell it what type, but because they're Vue files, they're actually the default export. So it gets a little more confusing. So I'm just going to do the harder part, which is home view from home view. And code view. And then I could just say export home view. Now, what doesn't it like about that? I don't know why I'm being vacant about this today. Export, I have to tell it what it is. So this is a function. You know what? Instead of trying to be fancy here and getting us bogged down in the stuff we don't like, I'm gonna just get rid of this idea of having an index just so we can move along our way, right? And here I'm just gonna replace this with that view. And the interesting thing about this experience is this is something I struggle with often. And that is I want to make things nice and eloquent, and then I go through all these churns of figuring out the best way to make it eloquent. And then ultimately just being able to create the router like this, import all the views I'm going to need, is going to be fine. This has been running in Vite in the background inside the Task Runner Explorer. So if I've done this right, I should be able to, let's get rid of these two tabs. Go to Home, Home and Code, and it's not showing them, so let's figure out why. I need a dump button. If you don't know what that is, it's from radio. Let's go over to our app view. Got this header. Got these. Oh, you know what? We never put in a router view. Now, router view, if you haven't used this before, is where the links are going to actually go here. So this is the container for them. And so I'm going to add to this section, just so we know it's going to be a container, just a border and let's say padding of 1, just so we can see and let's say border gray 200. Of course, I'm doing this all in Visual Studio, where it's not the best experience for most of this. So I'm going to actually close these real quick. I'm going to keep my program open, because what I'm going to want to do, and I think I did this last time, was actually open this project in Visual Studio Code. Now I'm using an extension that adds this option, but this just makes it a little easier to go ahead and open this, and I'd already opened it, so let's close them all so I can go back. And there's all our pieces. That looks better, and I'm going to collapse that since we're doing it over there. And because we're using the router view, we're going to need to pull it in as well. Now we're not using the use router yet, but we will in a minute. So there's our router view, and if we're lucky, this is something that I lost in the old change from router 3 to 4, is that we're now getting everything from the router, and this use router is allowing us to get access to our own router. And then our router view, which hopefully what does it not like there? I thought these were global anyway, so let's see what this looks like. It really hates us over here. Let me make it a little bigger so we can see it. I'm going to refresh the page. Properties of... Oh, you know what? This isn't working because over here in main, we haven't actually used it yet. So let's import... And if you remember from Here we actually have to opt into it. Where is the... Yeah, that's what I thought. So here we need to import our router from router. Now this is our actual router object, and all we're going to do with that object is use the router. This will add it to our app because there's nothing really built into our app until we do that. And because of that, we don't need this router view anymore because it is a global object. And let's see if cannot find code view or home view. That's interesting. Is it because I misnamed them? Probably. You're really getting to see how the sausage is made today. Views, views. So why aren't we getting the white button? So there's our site read. Oh, because it's way down here. Yeah, that's probably not what we wanted. It is working. Let's go to home and read code. Though evidently I have these backwards. So it is working, but we just have a problem with how we're setting this up. Remember we were doing with full here in our main. I'm sorry, we were doing height screen, and that shouldn't be in our header, that should be in our main. Min height string. Now we can see it really going back and forth between them. And a couple of these I think need to be moved. I don't know what that slash is for. Everything I'm doing makes sense so far? Still no questions, so either I'm being brilliant or no one's watching. We'll figure that out as we go. That's a little better. Read code, read, and let's go back to the views, because clearly I did these wrong. Code and home. Home, code. And you'll notice up here in the view here, this is changing the URL every time I do that. So we got our start, we got our routing done, got our code done, and so now we can actually start to get some more interesting things happening. So if we go, let's go to our home view and let's just start there and say, what is site reading? You know, I've been doing development too long when I'm defaulting to that. And so look, I'm just going to put in some text here, nothing all that fancy. Site read. I'm just going to put a button down here. Now we're not doing anything interesting. In fact, if we come back to our home right here, we'll see that this is awfully ugly. And the main reason it's awfully ugly is, hello Saba, is because we're using Tailwind, Tailwind resets everything. And we saw this earlier in our app, right? We saw that for this H1, we needed to do some things to make it look like we want to. But I'm actually going to go up to Tailwind, and we can create some overrides that are just common. Now, just so you can see how the sausage is being made, I can use a layer and then give it a layer, which I'll put these in components, and these will inject them at that point of the Tailwind. And I'll just say H1, H2, H3, at apply font bold, right? And then I can say H1, apply text 2XL. I'll copy this a couple more times so I can say for 2 and 3, XL and large, right? We've done this right, we'll see that we're now getting the headers showing in the way we really want to, right? We still are getting a very plain paragraph, and where our buttons are nowhere to be seen. And this would be fine if that's all we wanted to do. I'm actually going to get rid of this because I have I'm going to leave it commented out for now. And let's go to the Sight Reading app. And I'm going to actually do install at Sean Wildermuth /SaneWind. This is an NPM package I usually use for demos, but I'm going to go ahead and use here. That gives you some sane defaults. I still want most things to be reset. I could turn off resetting if I want, but these give some very vanilla defaults that I can actually change to. So let me add that. And over in our Tailwind config, I'm going to do a plugin, and I'm just going to tell it to require my SaneWind project. Now I can see we have some standard buttons. We can see that we have different sizings for these. In fact, you'll see that the header is still the same size because we had overwritten it with what we wanted this exact text to be, but the rest of this is starting to look more familiar. Buttons are going to look like buttons, etc. And if we, with that in place, so we don't have to do a ton, this will also include styles, basic styles for forms as well, because forms are one of those places where you end up doing a ton of styling as you're starting. In a lot of ways, this is to get us started. I may rip out SaneWind at some point and just create our own styles for everything, but we're not quite there yet. So let's go back to our app view just to do a tiny bit more cleanup. And that is, right now we have the hrefs here. And what I actually want instead is to use router link or router link. It's an often discussion about using Pascal case or using kebab case, and I actually hate kebab case. So you're going to see me use Pascal case in here. And this is going to require a 2 and I'm going to leave the class button here because this is ultimately going to resolve into a link as well. And so these are going to end up being components instead, right? Now, is this going to look any different? No, and in fact, it's not going to work any different, even though we've made that change. And this is mainly because router links allow you to do some more interesting things and control how they're styled and some other pieces. So I'd like, when we're actually linking via the router, to actually use router links. And one of the things you'll see some people do is actually bind the two to name home. Hopefully I got that right. And the idea here is inside of the router, we had a name here, which of course I didn't capitalize. And so here we have home still. And it's still resolving there, but it's doing it without having to know the pathing. That way all the pathing ends up in the router. Now I'm sort of on the fence about this, whether that's worth the trouble. For us, I'm going to simplify and just leave that there. So we've got a very summary basis for what we need here. Let's move on. Let's go back to the server. We have this get code that's returning some code, but there's not a lot here. Let's run the server. And here in this site read, we actually had weather forecast in here, but if you remember, we said API get code. Let's just make sure our server is actually running. Go ahead and run that. And we get the text back that it's just that plain piece. So we know that at least APIs are working at this point. And yeah, let's save that. And so this is a very basic piece. Let's go ahead and make our Angular. Go ahead and get that, just so we can see what that looks like. And then we can start to work on the back end, which I'll spend more time on today. So we've got our code, and I'm going to create the script template. And I'm exclusively using script setup, which if you're not familiar is a way that it sort of auto wires it for you. And I'm going to start with a object that's just going to be the code we want to actually show, right? We're going to need to import the ref. Sometimes it'll do it for you, sometimes it won't. And I'm just going to put in a div here, actually in a pre, because we're going to get the code pre-formatted. Just going to put that code in here so that it's going to show this. And obviously it's empty at this point, but what we'd like to do is handle when this page is launched, let's do something. Let's do onMounted, and we're going to go ahead and do something here. In fact, this needs to be async for us because we're going to make a network request. So let's go ahead and get a result by saying await fetch API get code, right? This will do a get by default, and so that should be good enough for us. And then if result dot status code, I believe it is. If it retrieved it, then we can say code.value equals result.json. And we're going to await that as well. And let's down here also put in a little div for a message. And we're going to use a VF to say if the message is blank, don't show it. But if we have a message, go ahead and do that. So we're going to need to const message equals ref, another blank. And these refs are so that when you make a change, like we're doing here by calling the value of it, that the UI can update. So I'll say else here and message.value equals don't work. So come back to here and let's go to the read code. And let's see what it didn't like. Let's go back to that console. They just changed. There they are. Code view, onMounted is not defined, of course. So this onMounted, unsurprisingly, is also from view. And evidently we got an error. And let's see why. Let's go ahead and go to our sources. I'm going to have to get used to all of that. There's our views. There's our code view. And this is the original file, but because we're dealing with this way, we can actually come down here, set a breakpoint. And what does that result look like? Body, headers. It's just status. It's not status code, which of course I should have known. But as I get older, it becomes harder and harder to remember anything. Unbreak that. And let's see what happened. There's our pre and there's nothing in it. So I'm using as well a Vue plugin into the browser that works for Edge and Chrome, and I believe they have one for Firefox as well, so whichever browser you're using. And so I can actually look at the data here and go, oh, that message, that code, which is a string, never got really decoded. And I think this is because it wasn't JSON. So let's actually make a change on the server. And let's return a new object. Essentially the same thing we had, but we're going to return an object instead, and what doesn't like there. Like that, okay, but why isn't it like that? Let's see what the error is over here. Why does it need to be a request delegate? This is where you guys can help me with pair programming and say, oh, it's that. That is very strange. Why does it think it's a task? I believe that would fix it now. Still does not like that. That is very strange. Let's go back and see what else I changed. And that's all fine. But when I say I forget where these have to be. Of course, it's probably because I'm trying to think of two languages at once. I don't know what I did. It must be, I must have put something somewhere that I wasn't supposed to. Let's go ahead and run this. Let's test out our API. Now we're getting an object with all of that stuff in it. So that should be fine. One of the other things I'm going to do here, how are we doing in time? Oh, we're only halfway there. So I'm going to turn off launching the browser because we're not actually going to use launching in the browser quite yet. And I'm going to simplify that to that. And so we know that works. Let's go back over to our view. And if the status equals 200, then we're going to get the data as this JSON object. And then data.code should be the thing we go ahead and set. Still doesn't like it. Let's find out. Let's go back to the code. That's elements. Where's my code? Huh. Why does that not like it? Fetch. Result.json. It does not like that. Why? Go to the console. You're really getting to see how the sausage is made, huh? Let's get rid of that and let's see what errors we get in the console. Oh, the reason this doesn't work is that we're not on the same server. And I think it's 5100. Let's go see over here. $52.11, which we could change that to make it easier, but for now we'll go ahead and say 52. This is where we start to get into the weeds with a CORS policy. And in order to solve all of this a little easier, I'm going to take this back out. I'm going to come over to our project. And I'm going to create a new www.root folder because I'm just going to have an index.html here. Now, if you know much about the way Vue works, it's actually hosting this page, right? This page has the link, the module link to the main source and then the app. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the div. So we have an app, and this is the container where the app is going to be. And then I'm going to say script type equals module, because that's the kind that Vite works with. And I'm going to say the source is 173 source main.ts. Now, what I'm essentially doing is pointing this at our Vite server. But in order to make this work, of course, I need to also, I'm actually going to get rid of HTTP redirection because we'll have that redirection being done elsewhere. I'm going to say app.use default use static files because we need to be able to serve things from this root, and app.use default I think goes first. And this essentially says when we go to a raw page, go ahead and return a whatever the index.html, or there's a few of them it looks for. And so in this case, let's close that. Let's go back to our debugger. Say launch, and we'll leave that as empty because that's fine. And now we should get run it here, assuming that it's being run here, and we'll get that page. And if we go over to read code, we can see the code is now being shown, right? All is good in the world. Sort of. Now, because this is not using hash history, it's using web history, if we try to go to code, we'll get a not found. Now, the reason for that is actually makes a lot of sense, because when we go to the root, it is loading us that default file. But when we go to some other, the default file isn't triggered because it's no longer the root, and there's no other piece of middleware that's handling that. And so what we actually want to do is say use what is it called? I thought it was fallback. Clearly it's not fallback. And so let's go over here. I don't know why it was. Oh, because it keeps on opening up in Chrome. Hold on. Tell it to launch as HTTP, and I want to use Edge. See if I can just find it real quick. File server, health monitoring, middleware. And I'm just going to say .NET 8 fallback. Yeah, that's not helping me at all. Yuck. There it is. Map fallback to file. And so when nothing matches, it's going to go ahead and say this regular index. So if we come back here, let's go to code, let's go to home, it's still running. Let's see if it actually restarted. Nope. I had run it without debugging, so let's go ahead and run with debugging again. So code now works, but you'll notice that if we put anything else in here, it will also take us to this. But of course, this doesn't match any route, and so we probably want to solve that at some point. But for now, I think I'm happy with just the home and the read code working. We're getting some code in here that works. And so let's go back and focus on the server, because we want to be able to store some of this information. Eventually, I'm going to want to have it use some tooling to create a bunch of code blocks that we can talk about. But now we have sort of this everything being set up. So we're going to need a couple things. I want to store this all in a SQL Server for now. We might decide to put it in some sort of object store later, but So I'm going to use .NET, though you'll see me sometimes use N because it's an alias for .NET on my machine. And I'm going to add a package. I need core.SQL server. Now I can certainly be doing this in the NuGet. Oh, I have to go to the right project. But when I know the names of them, this is so much faster than opening that up and all that other sort of thing. We also need design in here because we're going to be using migrations. And so now I'm going to go ahead and just start creating some boilerplate. So in my data folder, I'm going to create a data folder and I'm going to add a site read context. This will just be a DB context, which I'll bring in that ASP.NET Core piece. We need a constructor that takes our DB context options of site read context. Now, I'm just typing this out much like a starter project might have done this for me. I've done this a lot, so don't be too worried about the fact that I'm doing this by memory, because we saw earlier that I don't remember anything, but the editor framework stuff tends to come pretty easily for me. So I'm going to create a public DB set for our first set of data, and let's just call that code, and I'll call this code blocks. So let's call these code blocks, and because we're using nullable, I can go ahead and set it as set code. Now this looks like it might work. The problem is, of course, we don't have a code block. So let's create that. I'm going to put this in some entities folder, and this is just my convention. You certainly don't need to do this. And let's go ahead and just give it a couple of things. Evidently, I don't know how to spell required. Required string is going to be title of the code block, right? Nothing special, nothing insane yet, but we can see that we have our context. Let's bring in that namespace. Is that what I did wrong? It's so weird. I just did this too. I'm going to do something else I often do, which is I could look at the docs, or I could look at how I just did this. This is going to be a sample project that I'm going to be releasing soon. So let's go to my context here. I always do this. I always forget. There we go. So I have pretty much the simplest sort of context so far. I want to be able to actually add, wire it up to the database. So I'm going to override on configuring, which on configuring is going to let me I just like shortening some of these. I'm going to have to type a lot. Configuring the database usage. Some people do this in the in the program.cs. I like doing it here. I find it a little less fragile. Though if you have an option where you need to change it, this is the opposite approach of what you'd want to do. So let's go ahead and put options. Actually, it's not options. I just need the connection string. And how am I going to get that connection string? I'm going to get it from iConfiguration. And I'm going to create a field for it. So I should just be able to say config dot get connection string, and let's call this our site reading DB. So that all looks good, but we're going to need a connection strings site reading DB, and we're going to need some sort of connection string. I'm going to use my local server, this local SQL Server local DB that's installed with it. And here I'm just going to go to the connection string, and I'm going to paste it in here. Now I'm going to get rid of a lot of the stuff in here because this is just going to be a default that we're going to get rid of when we ever deploy it. So here's my database server, and I'm going to name our new database site readings DB, just like I did that. Everything else is fine. So we're all dealing with this locally. I would try to pronounce your name Batargan. I'm sure I'm butchering it, but welcome. So we've got all that. If we actually want to create a database, let's go ahead and say .NET EF migrations add initial. And if we do that, it'll read our entities, and hopefully I haven't messed anything up. Oh, I have. It's going to fail. Can't create the DB object because I haven't actually included it in our services. app.use DB context, builder.services.use DB context, add DB context, and this is going to be our site read context, and we'll bring that in. Now I already hate the name of this. I'm going to go ahead and rename it to site reading context since I have reading as the whole thing. Please don't show that again. And we should be all good. Let's try that again. How are we doing in time? We're almost done. So we can get these migrations created. There's our migrations. There's no data in it yet, but we have our migrations. And I like to go ahead and put this in another folder. It'll find it in this subfolder later, but I just like it to not have to be at the root level of the project. And let's go ahead and say .NET EF database update. Sorry about that. And you'll notice that it is complaining, and this is something I've been seeing lately, only invariant culture supported. and that's because of the this means that it doesn't no longer assumes that U.S. English is the culture. We have to define it, but in my case, I'm going to open it up here, and I'm actually just going to comment it out. We'll come back and solve that later because I don't want to leave us in a weird state. And let's try running it again. So someone asked about what I meant by sight reading code. So if you haven't watched the first video in this where it explains it, I'll explain it again, and I should probably explain it every time. There's a concept in music called sight reading. It's a thing that a lot of high schoolers and college musicians do as a sort of a contest, and you're sat down with a brand new piece of music, and you're supposed to read it and figure out what it sounds like and then play it. I want to apply this to code in that I would like to make a website. This is going to be a website where people come and are presented with a piece of code, and they're challenged to write a description of what it actually does to help us be able to learn how code works without having to constantly use the debugger. So it's going to be a tool specifically to allow us to maybe improve our skills at reading code, not just debugging code. So that went ahead and created it. And let's see if we can sneak in our last minute DB context. Nope. Sight reading context here. And I'll get the results by calling context dot code blocks to all, to list, async. I'm not even doing any. Well, it doesn't like that. To add that using for that to work, and then I'll go ahead and return results dot OK results. Now we'll come back and put in error checking and all that other sort of thing. And let's go ahead and just make sure this actually runs our test. No data in there yet, so it's giving us an empty array, and we'll be able to change our reading of the code here to actually use it, because it's not getting it in a format that it knows. It sees it as an empty array instead of a string. And so we've got this at a point. One of the things to note is that after every session, I will go ahead and check in this code. I have this out in a repo that I'll show you in a moment. So session 2 updates. To commit that, let's push it. I'm not actually going to create a pull request. I just wanted an easy way to get there. And so this is the site, Sean Wildermuth, sight read code, and this will have the updates that I push every time. So if you are curious about looking at the code afterwards, feel free. Again, that's github.com/Sean Wildermuth/sightreadcode. And so let's just wrap this up for a minute. So, one of my goals with these streams is to show you that everybody makes mistakes, that every time we do a talk in a conference or in a lesson that we put online, we're doing a lot of editing to edit out the, oh my God, I forgot how that works. And I really wanted you to be able to see that this really is how most people develop. I'm not any special than you are as a coder. I have more experience, so maybe some high-level things, but we all run into code. We need to fix and need to look up or need a copy from some other place to remember how we did it, I think that's all fine. I don't want to be in the ivory tower and say I'm a perfect developer, because I certainly am not. So that's my spiel. Hopefully I'll see you guys on Thursday at 4 o'clock Eastern here in the US, or UTC -5. And tell your friends. Feel free to look at and subscribe to get updates when these go out. I'm also announcing them on Twitter. So follow me there and at Sean Wildermuth, or, by the way, I'll never call it X. It's Twitter. Or on YouTube at S. Wildermuth is the name of the channel. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.